However, elasticity of demand is not the only type of elasticity which we study when we discuss demand for a good. Demand can also depend on income. So corresponding to the price elasticity of demand, we have income elasticity of demand. It is basically given by the percent change in the quantity of a good over the percent change in income. And again, the percent change is calculated using the midpoint method. Now recall that the sign of elasticity talks about the direction of change between the numerator and the denominator. For normal goods, as income goes up, buyers demand more of it. Thus, we should expect the sign of elasticity of income for a normal good to be positive. For inferior There's one more elasticity which pertains to the demand for a good, and that's called cross-price elasticity of demand. It's essentially given by the percent change in quantity demanded for good 1 in response to a percent change in the price of good 2. For example, suppose we're looking at the market for chicken. Beef and chicken are substitutes. So let's say chicken is good 1 and beef is good 2. As price of beef goes up, people move from beef towards chicken, and thus we expect the sign of elasticity to be positive. On the other hand, consider the relationship between complements. Computers and software are complements. So let's say in this case, good 1 is software and good 2 is computers. As the price of computers increases, we will expect the demand for softwares to decrease. Because these two move in the opposite direction, we'll expect the sign of cross-price elasticity of demand for softwares in response to a change. So here I have a table in which I focus on market for burgers and try to summarize these various elasticity measures, the numerator, the denominator, and the sign in this table. So examine this table carefully and make sure you understand it before you proceed. Finally, let's move on to the price elasticity of supply. Now if you understand the concept of elasticity of demand, this should be very similar. This is quite analogous to elasticity of demand. It's just that now we look at the market from the seller's perspective. So price elasticity of demand is the percent change in the quantity supplied of a good in response to a percent change in its price. So this measures how the quantity supplied responds to a change in price. In other words, it measures the seller's price sensitivity, and we use the midpoint method in calculating the various elasticities of supply. So just like we had a variety of demand curves, we also have a variety of supply curves. And just by looking at the steepness of the curve, we can get an idea of how elastic or inelastic the supply is. Now, consider the first curve. in panel A. It's a vertical line at 100 units. So in this case, no matter what the price, the quantity supplied will not change. This is the extreme case in which the sellers just cannot respond to a change in price. An example could be stadium tickets or seats in the Metrodome. They are limited no matter what the price. You can't really increase the number of seats at the dome. Panel B talks about a fairly inelastic supply curve. Okay, the magnitude is less than 1. The numbers 22% and 10% correspond to those used from the midpoint method. You can verify that yourself. So in panel B, as we can see that a 22% change in price results in only a 10% change in quantity supplied. The curve is fairly steep and supply is fairly inelastic. In panel C, the supply curve is fairly flat. A 22% change in price increases the quantity supplied by 67%. Here, sellers are very price sensitive. They respond a lot to a change in price, and thus the supply curve is fairly elastic. In the extreme case, in panel E, the supply curve is perfectly elastic. Here, the sellers are extremely responsive to a change in price. The supply curve is horizontal. Now keep in mind that this curve in panel E and the vertical straight line curve are just the extreme cases. Usually elasticities exhibit a behavior between those two extremes. So either supply is fairly inelastic and the curve is fairly steep, or the supply is elastic and the curve is flatter, like in panel D. Now what factors affect elasticity of supply? Recall that elasticity measures the responsiveness of supply to a change in price. If the sellers can adjust their supply fairly quickly, we'll expect the supply to be fairly elastic. Beachfront property is quite limited in supply. As the price changes, its supply will not change a whole lot. So we can expect the supply curve for beachfront property to be fairly vertical or close to a straight line. On the other hand, it's much easier to adjust the supply of cars in response to a change in price, and thus we would expect the supply curve for cars to be fairly flat. Usually, in the long run, sellers can adjust much more efficiently and strongly to a change in price. If the price of a particular product stays high, sellers may be able to adapt new technologies, find new ways of producing that good, and just produce more, and thus respond much more to a change in price. Thus, in the long run, the supply curve can be fairly elastic or flatter. It's usually fairly inelastic in the short run.